It's the Growing for Market podcast.
I really want to make sure that people that are working here are taken care of and that I'm doing the best that I can as a manager. In the early days, you are just learning how to grow things and then you're learning how to sell them. And if you get good at both of those things, then you're going to need help. And that is a thing that it's often forgotten to talk about because there is so much there's so many things that are exciting about learning to grow plants, and I will never be bored by that idea and continuing to improve and learn that. And selling also has a certain sexiness to it in that you're making money off these things that you learned how to grow. And then it gets a little bit more challenging in a different way that maybe at initial look doesn't sound either fun and exciting or sexy because it's really hard stuff and it's very personal and it's about people, and there can be a lot of things that are tangly about working with people.
Hello and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing flowers and vegetables for local markets. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine, proudly celebrating 35 years in 2026 as the magazine by and for vegetable and flower market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Farming is hard. Running it shouldn't be. Tend helps you plan your season, map your farm, and track every task from seed to sale. No spreadsheets, no guesswork, just seamless workflows. Tend is the all-in-one farm management platform that brings together planning, field mapping, fulfillment, real-time inventory, sales, labor, traceability, and accounting in one easy platform. Built for small market gardens, CSAs, and large diversified farms. Get started with a free account at tend.com. That's TEND.com. No credit card required. If you grow for market, you know performance is everything. That's why so many farmers are turning to Burpee's Farmers Market. Dedicated to professional growers, Burpee is now offering non-GMO seeds in larger quantities, bred and selected for standout flavor, strong yields, and the kind of visual appeal your customers crave. All farmers market varieties are trialed at Burpee's research farm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where expert horticulturalists test for germination rate, vigor, disease resistance, high yield, and consistency, things that make a difference in the field and to your bottom line. The seed assortment includes USDA certified organic varieties, Burpee bred classics, heirlooms, and exciting new introductions. Burpee's been doing this for 150 years, and they're still creating new varieties with growers like you in mind. You can check out the full lineup at burpee.com/farmersmarket. That's burpee.com/farmersmarket. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Maggie Taylor to the Growing for Market podcast. Maggie is the founder and owner of Delight Flower Farm, growing cut flowers for commercial production near Champaign, Illinois. She has been a lifetime gardener and a professional grower for over a decade. Delight Flower Farm is a robust 5-acre farm with 3 hoop houses, a variety of revenue channels, and a 6+ person farm crew. I should also mention that this interview is a follow-up on an article Maggie wrote for the March 2023 Growing for Market magazine about how she was incorporating agroforestry into the farm. And a link to the article is free and available to everyone in the show notes. So, without further ado, welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, Maggie.
Thanks so much, Andrew. It's an honor to be here. I do have so much respect for the Growing for Market family, I guess, of work, which is the magazine. I've been a longtime reader, and I love listening to the other really knowledgeable and experienced farmers that you interview on the podcast. So it is truly an honor to be here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. I really am just trying to keep the ball rolling that Lynn started 35 years ago. Believe it, this is the 35th anniversary of Growing for Market. So in fact, when we were doing a lot of the transition stuff for Growing for Market about a decade ago, she said, I have two kids and Growing for Market is my third. So I took that as like, take care of it. And so I've been trying to do the best I possibly can because I know my wife and I, we learned a lot from Growing for Market when we were apprenticing around the country and kind of like learning market farming. So I just want to keep it going. And actually, this podcast, we've only been doing this for about 3 years, but this is something that I have come to enjoy even more than I anticipated, really, just because I realized it's an opportunity to learn directly from growers like yourself. And the whole Growing for Market community is just tends to be so sharing. Gives us a little different format to kind of go a little deeper on some things and ask follow-up questions and stuff like that, the way that articles in the magazine don't really give us. So I feel like it's a great complement to the magazine.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of farmers don't necessarily identify as articulate writers, but can usually talk pretty well about what it is that they're doing on their farm or the things that they're passionate about. So I think it gives like another voice, pun intended, to, the market farmer perspective.
That's a really good point because there have been some people that I wanted to write an article for the magazine and I'd ask them and I realized, yeah, not everybody is a writer. That's like kind of my background. Like I was that kid like who had like the cargo shorts with like a notebook in the shorts all the time, just like taking notes and stuff like that. And I mean, like actually, so it's funny, Maggie. Okay, let me back up. So I should mention the idea for this podcast came about after I got to meet you in person this winter at the ASCFG conference. But I forgot until I reread your article that some of your projects were on a 3-year timelines, and now it's 3 years after your 2023 article. So this might be a great time to check in and see how your agroforestry projects are coming along. But yeah, like I don't know, that was just something I did to be a writer. Okay, so my mom was a librarian, so I think she was definitely like brought a lot of books home. And I seem to remember you saying that you had a background in like librarianism, so librarians represent. But I don't know, I think because of that, and actually my granddad was also a writer, so in a way, like I don't know, I think it's kind of in my blood in a way. But that was a big digression. My point being, there have been a few people who I really wanted to write articles for the magazine who just never would because they weren't writers, and that I've been able to get to come on the podcast. So yeah, that was a really happy thing for me to be able to get some of those people that I really wanted to contribute. I was finally able to get them because of the podcast.
Oh, that's wonderful. You remembered right. I was a librarian before a farmer. So I went to school for library science. I have a master's in library science, which isn't like exactly transferable skills, but some of the organization and skills in researching and finding information are really applicable to this kind of work.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I always thought actually, I mean, it's funny, I was always a writer, and then I thought I was going to be a journalist, and then I got more interested in farming, and then now I'm back to journalism. So I guess one of my thoughts was that communication skills can be useful pretty much almost with anything that you're doing. And so I guess it worked out in my case because now I'm kind of doing both. But yeah, I think there's a lot of transferable skills there. But okay, so I described the basics of your farm in the intro, and you describe it in the article, but I don't know how much has changed in 3 years. So can you tell us a little more about your farm as far as crops, markets, climate, and other agriculturally relevant information?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, since the article was published, I think our zone has changed. So I think at the end of that article, I say we're zone 5B, but we're actually 6A now. So a little warmer. And as the rest of the world is experiencing a really volatile weather, changes in weather, really heavy downpours, really long droughts, really high heat, all those sorts of things. But we are located in central Illinois, so it's typical Midwest. It's a 5-acre farm that has a lot of established trees on it from former owners, but the surrounding area, like in all directions for seemingly hundreds of acres, maybe thousands, is mostly corn and soybean. So there's a lot of wind. There's a lot of dust storms that we've been experiencing this spring, which is kind of new to me. We'll get weather alerts that there's a dust storm coming. We've had 4 so far this spring, and it just really, it's like everything gets covered in a layer of dust, which if you're growing a product that you cut and sell to be beautiful, it doesn't work very well if it's got a layer of dust to it. So yeah, there's that in terms of like geographic and weather and zone context. I will say we're still growing on about the same, my farm hasn't expanded at all, but the amount of the land that we have in production has grown. And I have added another high tunnel since the article was written, and we have plans to add another high tunnel this year. So that's kind of like what happens for a lot of farmers. I think you build one high tunnel and you realize, oh, wow, this is really amazing and really beneficial. And you keep building more and bigger ones. And my crew has changed a little bit. I guess I would say that's kind of the biggest shift on my farm in terms of my farming practices in the last 3 years is that I went from having a lot of part-time employees that were highly educated. The town that I'm in close proximity to is Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, which is where the University of Illinois is. So there's a lot of really well-educated people that are here part of the labor force. And so I went from having a lot of like highly degreed artists working part-time on the farm to having now a little bit more of professional laborers, professional farmers. I'm utilizing the H-2A program, which is a program that is a temporary visa for workers from other countries to come in and work on the farm for a maximum of 10 months in any given year. For me, ideally, it's like 8 or 9 months that they're here. And this is my second year into that program. So that has really been a game changer in some really amazing ways and also challenging in some other ways. So that's kind of one of the biggest changes to the farm. And then we do have this little tiny bit of hindsight 3 years after planting a lot of those woody perennial crops that I wrote about in Growing for Market in 2023. So yeah, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I definitely have some reflections on those practices now that the plants are planted and they're growing up, and some of them we've started to harvest off of.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. The two things I picked up on there are the dust storms. I mean, that's interesting or upsetting also, especially since it sounds like you said that it's a newer thing. And it just reminds me of the Dust Bowl. And it's one of those things where if you weren't having dust storms before and you are now, that's a worrying trend. It makes me wonder what exactly is going on there. Because a lot of the other stuff that you said really tracks for what we are seeing on our farm. We're up in Maine, and you were talking about how you changed zones with the updated USDA zone hardiness map, and along with our, all the zones being changed to reflect the warmer climate that we're living in. I guess when I heard about climate change, global warming, I always thought like, okay, well, things will be like they are now, but just a little bit warmer. And I've realized that along with, being warmer, it's also disrupting the patterns, the weather patterns that we used to be able to count on. So sort of like you said, we'll have unexpected periods of heat or drought or precipitation. Like lately, it seems we've had a very wet spring kind of weather pattern that seems like weather patterns are definitely changing, and it does make me wonder where they're going to settle, if there is any such thing as settling, like what the new normal is. And so that tracks with what we're seeing here. Oh, and on the H2A, we've had a few articles about H2A in the magazine. So if people...
I love them. Yeah. Rebecca's written most of those articles. I think Stephen Gretel wrote one too, but yeah, it's really helpful for me going through the process to have their mentorship. I know all 3 of those, or I guess both of those farms, all 4 of those people, and they've been really helpful for me learning kind of what goes into H2A hosting. It's a lot more than just hiring someone and them working for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, good memory. Yeah. Gretel Adams and Rebecca more recently have both written articles about H2A, which are they're worth reading, I think, if someone's thinking about engaging with the H2A program, because you have to provide housing for the workers, and can be a really good way to find people to work on the farm, because I know labor is always a hot topic with farmers, but it's more, yeah, like you said, it's more than just like hiring somebody. So, and now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer. This episode is sponsored by Nifty Hoops. Nifty Hoops designs and builds high tunnel systems for growers who want dependable results. What stands out is that Nifty Hoops tunnels are complete systems designed by experienced builders with the details worked out ahead of time. That means the core components are included from the start, like end walls, ventilation, doors, baseboards, and double-layer poly, rather than being added later. The tunnels are designed for real wind and snow loads, efficient assembly, and long service life. You can choose a self-build kit with guidance from written manuals and videos, or a community build where Nifty Hoops works alongside you and the project gets completed in one day. Nifty Hoops has built more than 1,500 hoop houses across the country, including many funded through the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative. They're known nationwide for predictable outcomes and ongoing support. If you're planning a high tunnel project and want it done right, you can learn more at niftyhoops.com. And now, back to the show. Okay, well, Maggie, I wanted to ask you if the sticky note is still there. In your article from 3 years ago, you mentioned how was a yellow sticky note with the question, "How do I farm better and do less?" that had been above your desk for a few years. So is it still there?
Not right now, because I just pulled it off to show it to you. So it is still in the bulletin board above my desk. It's very faded right now, but I will say sticky notes kind of help me, like they trigger what is really important or something. So I also have a new sticky note on here. I don't know if the screen's going to capture it, but this is my newest pep talk for myself, which is, well, I have two. So one is for miserable tasks on the farm, either bag it if you can, like skip the task, or better it, like add music or add snacks at the end or something to make it easier, or barter it. Can you trade that task for another task or something like that? So that was a tip I got from Katie Bishop of Prairie Earth Farm, which is nearby, about an hour away. I don't know if she's written any articles for Growing for Market, but she's in the farming world and kind of public person, so maybe you know of her. But then I also have another sticky note that says, "Because it matters." And that's just a reminder for me of things that often happen in farming, because there's so many things to do. It's hard to prioritize what is important. And for me, one of the struggles has been taking care of myself, my body, drinking enough water, some of those really basic things. So having a reminder of it matters, because if I am dehydrated or sick or fill in the blank extra stressed, if I'm not coping with the requirements of my body to do this job well, then it affects everything else. So I do find sticky note pep talks to be really inspiring and just helpful triggers for me to remember what's important to keep the farm sustaining itself in the long run.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a good job for them to do. And yeah, actually, I met Katie at a Moses conference. Oh, probably many years ago, back when it was called Moses. I know they're now called Marble Seed.
Yeah.
And she's one of those people that I was trying to get to write an article for GFM. So I'm sure she listens to the podcast. Maybe she'll hear this and this will remind her. Or maybe she wants to come on and do a podcast interview because they seem like they were doing a lot of interesting things on their farm.
Yeah. I will say, getting back to the like, how can I farm better and do less? When I saw the interview questions that you sent me an email as like, oh, you're going to check in with me about this, it felt a little bit like one of those accountability moments of like, ooh, am I doing less? And the answer is yes and no, because I think what I have done is trade up some of the like actual like physical manual labor tasks, like some of the things that I was the sole person that was doing it, or part of a small team doing it. Now I have like kind of experts that's their thing that they're doing. Like, I still harvest, I still transplant sometimes, but there are things like right now my crew is laying out the landscape fabric on the 100-foot beds, and I haven't done that on any of the beds this year. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm above it, but I've kind of like found someone to do that so that that's not pressing on my to-do list as something that I'm solely responsible for.
Yeah.
So in that way, it's kind of like a little bit less in terms of the diversity of the tasks that I'm doing. But I would say my farm is, if anything, it definitely has grown in terms of sales, in terms of production, and even in terms of revenue streams. So in that front, I'm not doing less. And that's something I would really like to concentrate on and continue to have that nudge from the sticky note and from you to be accountable to.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, it sounds like you've delegated some stuff, which I think is really good. I know, actually, I think I can speak for my wife too in this department. I certainly had trouble, like when we were trying to grow our farm, sort of like delegating tasks, because we started out doing most of the things ourselves. And then it's just one of those things, there's only so much one person can do. And so then when you're trying to balance, you're like putting the plastic down on beds, but you also have to do marketing and talk to your grocery store customers and everything. There's only so many people who can talk to the produce buyers, but there's a lot of people who could roll out the plastic. And so it may sound like an obvious thing to do to start delegating, but I'm glad that sounds like that has maybe been a part of doing less or doing different things, just because I think sometimes that can be hard to delegate, like things that you've always done to other people. I know I'll speak for myself. I had a hard time. Like greenhouse work is the example I would use, because I was kind of a perfectionist about it, and I also kind of liked doing it, and so I had a really hard time letting go of that. But once I did, it was transformative.
Yeah, I relate to that too. I think there is something that is, they say dirt therapy. There's something really soothing about a task that you can zone out and you like just transplant, these 700 plants by hand. That is like, now these days, that's one of the kind of tasks I dream about. Like, if only I could do that, that would be amazing. But it's also, if I did that, then there would be so many other things I couldn't do. So it's kind of necessary that you start to delegate and that you find what are the things that only you can do and what are the things that you do really well. So, it's important for the business to keep doing those things that only you can do and that you do really well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Somebody's got to write the grants, make the plan for all that other stuff to happen. And so, yeah, as the farm owner and manager, you're it. So, yeah, actually your post it about I forget what it said about the bad jobs or whatever. It reminds me of a thing that a friend of ours that we used to work on a farm with said. He said that farming is like 1,000 mundane tasks that add up to something amazing, and that's kind of like, I feel like that's true, is that rolling out plastic or picking it back up again is not the most exciting thing in the world, but it makes really beautiful things happen. So I think that's just the reality with farming. Okay. In the article, you say you were hesitant to plant perennials when you were on rented land, which is understandable. But now that you have your own farm, you were going to start planting perennials. Can you tell us about the plan that was described in the article 3 years ago and how it went?
Yeah. So initially, my goal was to, how to farm better and do less. So is there something that I can plant once and reap the harvest of from years to come. But also, as someone who's ecologically minded, there are so many more benefits to perennials other than just saving labor, if that is in fact what it does, because there's carbon sequestering, there's habitat for wildlife that then has like another trickle benefit of, if you have more birds, you have less bugs, or all those sorts of things. You have more even fertilizer in your fields, you have more diversity, which we all know is a good thing. So there's kind of an impetus for the project, which was like, how can I reduce the amount of beds that I'm planting over and over again every year? And then there were all these side benefits. So the initial plan was through the USDA, an EQIP grant, to put in some alley crops. So alley cropping is used on larger farms to basically be like, you could plant, I don't know what the scale is, but let's say it's a few acres of corn, and then you're doing a row bed of elderberry, and then you're doing more corn, and then you're doing hazelnuts or something like that. So it just breaks up that monocrop into more diversity, which creates more wildlife, more habitat, and also is better for the soil and taking some of the soil out of all that tillage that happens on an annual basis and all the chemical applications and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of historical use of alley cropping, even though it doesn't typically have a very long history. But on a small scale market size farm like mine, the idea was to do 4 beds of annuals like dahlias, celosia, or sunflowers, and then 1 bed of an alley crop, woody crop, and then 4 more beds of annuals, and then an alley crop. So it's like these little alleys running, these little streets running through the field that are perennials. Then those beds don't get tilled, they get planted once. Some maintenance is required to manage weeds, and then you can harvest off of them if you plant perennials that kind of have a dual purpose. So in my case, we planted, I think it's 5 or 6 beds of alley crops in one of my fields. So 1 bed is elderberry. 1 bed is highbush cranberry. 1 is arrowwood viburnum. I think we also had a bed of holly, which, plot spoiler, all of the holly died. So that's no longer a holly bed. And then some winterberry, some ilex. So all of those are crops that in theory could be used for floral production. Typically, when you're growing plants, woodies or perennials for floral production, the ornamental varieties have been bred to be ornamental. So good for the bouquets, having long base life, long stems, aesthetically pleasing. Those aren't always the same as the native cultivars, which is what the USDA wants you to use. So there's a little bit of like, it's a little bit of a mismatch, but I tried to find varieties of these plants that would both fulfill the requirements of the grant and also have some usable function for the farm in the future.
Okay, that's interesting. So they wouldn't have been into it if you planted the strictly ornamental cultivars?
No, they have like a list of species varieties that are acceptable for them. So
Oh, okay. Well, at least there's a list. Okay, well that's good to know.
yeah, and the list is quite long, and it depends kind of on the county that you're in, which list is for you. All of that is on government websites, which of course are a little bit of like a jungle to parse through. But I have a great office here locally. The NRCS office here has had some really great people in there who've been able to work through these kind of odd requests. They're part of their natural, normal protocol for work, but often these specific programs aren't highly utilized. They're used to other, like, conservation plantings or things like that are CRP, I guess is the word that I'm looking for, or the acronym that I'm looking for. They're used to doing things that many of the farmers in my area are utilizing. So I'm a little bit unique to them. And thankfully, they've been patient and helpful in, pointing me in the right direction.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. And yeah, there are so many good people working in extension on all the various professions that help farmers. People should really reach out and see how they can work with those people because they're there to help farmers. So I'm glad to hear that. It sounds like you had a good experience with them in your case. And if I can quote you back to yourself really quickly, there's one point in the article I really like the way you put it, where you say that the practices that you're trying with the agroforestry are intended to increase the overall health of our ecosystems and in the long run decrease the annual labor on our farms, which sounds like the double bottom line, of increasing financial health while also increasing ecosystem health. So I liked how you put that in the article. And so the other thing that occurs to me is that, so if people aren't going for an NRCS or some kind of a grant with these, and they could go, if they're just paying to plant them on their own, they could look up they could use the ornamental species.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's things like peonies, which are really common on a flower farm. That's a perennial, takes about 3 or 4 years to get established, but then you can harvest off of it as long as you live.
Yeah.
That would be considered alley cropping in the sense because it is a perennial that you could interplant with annuals. There's other perennials that are more like low, bushy things that kind of have a winter die off and then come back, like yarrow or monarda or baptisia. And there's ornamental and native varieties of all of those. And we do have a lot of those on our farm that I'm continuing to actually increase those as well. But many of those perennials like baptisia, which I hope I'm pronouncing right, it has a very short bloom window, and then the rest of the year it's kind of taking up space. And it's not really large enough that, let's say, it's not really creating a lot of habitat for any creatures or critters. It does have the soil sequestering benefit because we're not disturbing it or, digging it up and transplanting it, but it doesn't really have the same benefit as, for example, our elderberry, which we're recording this on May 27th, and the elderberry, which I coppiced down to ground level in February, is already taller than me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that is growing very vigorously. And I would say, that's an example of the alley cropping that in theory it worked because we planted it. It filled in that entire bed, and it's been very, very productive. But I will say, in my opinion, it didn't necessarily work for the purpose that I needed it to in the place that it's in, because now we have 4-foot wide beds on center, and then we have about 18 inches of path in between. That's kind of our template all over the farm. We have a little different thing happening in the hoops. But if you think about a bed, we just planted a single line of elderberry. Now it's gone beyond the 4-foot wide bed, and we just have had to start tilling it out of the side beds to be able to plant our dahlias and annuals. And we come through with hedge trimmers just so we can get a path to get to the crops that we're harvesting on the beds of either side of them. So I think there's some of the kind of spatial planning things about the alley cropping, at least using the USDA EQUIP grant, or even kind of just planning purposes on the square footage of a small farm. They get a lot bigger, a lot faster than you think. And if you're still planning to do annual crops on either side, there's shade to account for. And then there's just that mass of the plant taking up space where you actually need to stand or bend over or squat to do what you're doing in the beds adjacent to it. So that has kind of been I don't know if you would call that both a success and a failure, in the sense that it succeeded too well. But I think maybe in hindsight, what I would have done is, now we've put the two adjacent beds, instead of dahlias that are in the beds for a full season and really they're growing for a long time, and then we're harvesting off of them just in the fall. Now we put in sunflowers on both of those beds on either side, because they're growing at a rapid enough rate, and then we're cutting them and then turning that bed over quick enough that we can kind of keep the elderberry under control, and the sunflowers, will shoot up pretty quick, as opposed to when we had dahlias there. They were a lot slower growing because they had shade. There's also all these sort of nuanced things that I'm like, is this because of the elderberry? Because we noticed that the leaves of the dahlias were a lot deeper green and the plants were a lot fuller. So is that a moisture level in the soil? Is there like some sort of chemical that's being emitted from the roots or some sort of mycelium that is living on the elder that's helping the dahlias next to it? But from a management kind of production standpoint, it wasn't helpful to plant the dahlias close to the elderberries for the humans that are part of the equation as well. So, there's been a lot of things. There isn't really a good place to go for a resource for this kinds of information for real practical application. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation because I would have wanted to hear this like 3 years ago myself before investing and putting these into place. So my kind of cautionary advice would be if you're planning to introduce woodies through alley cropping through the grant or just woodies on your farm to reduce labor and increase all the other benefits on your farm, just be really careful about the positioning that you choose for them because they will likely get a lot bigger than you think and your typical spacing won't really work out. And if they do have a lot of great success, you may want to give them more space, which means that you're taking space that you were planning on something else being there.
Okay, well, that makes sense because I was actually going to ask whether you had either shading or, like escaping the bed kind of issues with any of those woodies. So I guess the answer is yes. And what are you cutting off the elderberry?
Well, we're a commercial cut flower farm, but we also sell bulk wholesale herbs to bakers and makers and a kombucha brewery place and other places like that, as well as we make some of our own teas. And we're kind of phasing that out of the farm and more selling wholesale herbs to people that are doing that production work. But so we have harvested the elder flowers as well as the elderberries, but again, it's almost too productive for us to keep up with the amount of elderberries that we have in production right now.
Oh, okay.
And to be able to have sales avenues for those because we are really trying to focus on selling flowers. But for example, one of the other beds, like the dogwood or the American cranberry, both of those we have usable stems that we can cut and sell to florists or sell to grocery stores or put in our bouquets. So that can be really helpful. And we haven't harvested a lot of those at this point yet, but this will probably be the first year for those two crops that I mentioned. We have harvested some of the berries off of the arrowwood viburnum. We're still waiting on the ilex winterberry. So there's a few that, take some time. So it's a little bit like a longer return on investment. And it's kind of like that roommate that you've had for a very long time that's, turning up the heat or up and down or leaving their clothes different places. But, one day they're going to make a really nice dinner that they share with you. And so it's worth it. I don't know, maybe that's a bad metaphor, but it does feel like they're taking up real estate for a period of time and the payoff hasn't come yet. So that could be like in 3 more years, we'll have another podcast and see like, has there been enough production off of those crops to really make it worth it? If that's your main goal. I do think the other goals of having more habitat for birds, having fewer beds to till, and the general like beauty that robust perennials bring to the farm also has some benefit if it's not quantifiable. It's just emotional and aesthetic.
Yeah, well, I guess that is the trade-off, right? Is that they take longer to get established, but then you don't have to plant them every year. And also, one thing about perennials, right, is that, we've had a number of articles in the magazine over the years about different perennials. And I know that perennials can sometimes add things, sort of like unusual, interesting elements to arrangements, right? Because in North America, a lot of farmers can grow the same annuals with some, a little bit of variation, but I feel like sometimes perennials can add just like the unusual or unexpected elements to an arrangement, because not everybody is growing the same perennials. Some of the perennials have like more fresh version, and then some of them can be harvested, say, at the end of the season as seed pods, or as even when the foliage is falling off is interesting looking branches and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the values of perennials is they can add a the je ne sais quoi maybe to people's arrangements.
Yeah, I will say we did plant more perennials that weren't part of the grant. So we have planted snowball, viburnum, lots and lots of hydrangea, nine bark. And some of those we got not as bare root plants, but as like 2 or 3 gallon pots. And so we've been able to harvest off them a little bit quicker. And we interplant right in. So our typical spacing for woodies is about 5 or 6 feet apart in the row to account for the size that they're going to get in the long run. It varies a little bit depending upon the variety, but we've experimented a little bit and found it useful to plant like daffodil bulbs in between or peonies in between, because a lot of the perennials get coppiced, which just means like cut down almost to the ground in late winter. And so there's sunlight and space for the daffodils or the peonies to come up and have kind of production happen, have some harvestable flowers. And then once those are done, and those plants still need to stay in that space because daffodils and peonies are still perennials, then those woodies are kind of taking up more of their space with their foliage and their flowers. And so they seem to live well together. And I think that that's a way to utilize the space, at least with daffodil bulbs or something like that in the short term, as the perennials are still getting established.
Oh, well, that's a great idea to make the most out of that space while they're still coming along. Because I was going to ask you what the best perennials have been, but it sounds like you're not there yet, right? I mean, it sounds like you said, this might be the first year. So, okay, we'll do another podcast episode in 3 more years and talk about which perennials really stood out.
Sounds good.
Okay. Oh, and I should say, I am doing an interview with a peony grower later on this week. So if people are interested in peonies, they're going to have a whole show all about peonies. It's a grower who bought a farm, but bought the planting stock, not the ground, and had to move an entire farm's worth of peonies. So that's why I asked her to come do an interview. I'm like, you've done this a lot. Let's talk about peonies. So stay tuned, folks. Probably within an episode or 2 after this one, we will have a episode all about peonies if you're interested in that. So, okay. So in your article, you said, quote, "This last time around, I decided to add some additional programs to my high tunnel application, including alley cropping, windbreak renovation, structures for wildlife, and cover cropping. And each of these programs adds points to your overall ranking in the application process, making it more likely that you'd receive funding overall." And so that was something I was not aware of until I read about it in your article. Can you explain that concept of like the points ranking for other people who may be going for an NRCS high tunnel or other grant?
Yeah, I will say I also mentor farmers. I do like a one-on-one mentorship program, and there's info on our website about that.
Oh,
But
cool.
one of the farms that I have mentored in the past, she successfully got a high tunnel one year and then applied the second year for a high tunnel. And she said, "Hey, I didn't get it. Do you have any reasons why?" I wish she would have asked me before she applied. But I said, "Well, what other programs or what other conservation projects did you put in the application?" She said, "Nothing else." But I think that the USDA favors or looks to like, can you make more? We're giving you this money to make improvements on your farm, but also for the intent is conservation, to improve the soil, the water, the land that you're on. So if you can add more things to that contract or that proposal, it's going to be in your favor. And a lot of times the things that you add don't have to be huge things. Like maybe I wasn't planning to put up bat houses and bluebird houses on my farm, but if it means that my ranking gets more points and I have bats and bluebirds on my farm and I spend a little bit of money that mostly gets reimbursed to do that, and it makes it possible for the big thing that I really want to happen, which at this time in 2023 was the alley cropping and a high tunnel, then it is really beneficial to look at what those things that you can add are. And on the USDA website, I think it's on the NRCS page, they have a list of programs. And again, like if you speak with your local officer at your county NRCS, they will be able to tell you, you can put in pollinator habitat, you can do cover cropping, you can, like we did, repair the windbreak. I will say, really exciting announcement. I have completed that contract and I am in another USDA contract, which is just getting established now, but it had lots of things in the proposal in order to rank higher. But it's the largest amount of dollars that I will have ever received in an NRCS grant. But also the most exciting part is it's the first commercial composting facility for plant waste, plant material in the state of Illinois. So yeah, we're going to be putting in, this contract that I'm in currently is a 5-year contract. And that's strategic on purpose because of our current administration not putting a lot of funding towards conservation, and hopes that I give myself enough time to do the project that there will be a change and someone will make sure that, there is conservation funding available. So I gave myself a longer window, which is something, if you are applying for USDA grants, you kind of want to be strategic. If you sign a contract that says, I'm going to do this project in 1 year, you are legally obligated to do that contract in 1 year, but you may have a family member get sick. You may have, all different, you may have like a year where your farm is not as financially stable or something like that. So I think another piece of advice would be to give yourself a longer window of time for the contract. If you do the projects in a shorter window of time and you get them approved, you'll get reimbursed. So there's no drawback to a longer obligated contract. But the current contract that I'm in, the big point of it, the big purpose was to create compost that's high quality, nutrient dense out of our plant material waste. So out of our weeds, out of all the kind of potting soil we might use in crates, out of all the stems that we cut off and leaves that we strip and all those sorts of things. And in order to get that, I fought pretty hard and had lots of meetings with lots of people who didn't know if it was a doable idea, even though it was listed as one of the funded projects through USDA. But I added to it more wildlife habitat. I added cover crop to it. I added another high tunnel to that proposal. So adding more conservation projects in one contract or in one proposal just benefits the farmers because they'll rank higher, because it's essentially communicating to the USDA, like, I'm serious about conservation and I'm going to do as much as I can to benefit, good land stewardship and care of these resources.
Cool. Okay. Well, that is a really great tip there for people who are going for USDA grants to give themselves multiple years. If there's, like you said, if there's no penalty for finishing early, might as well give yourself a little bit more time. Because I know a lot of projects we've done on our farm, we laid out a very ambitious timeline for things, and in many cases, we didn't do the projects as fast as possible. And I'm not talking USDA grants. I'm talking just like regular farm projects, like let's build a hoop house by May, and we finish it by October. So, I mean, that's a great tip right there. Just give yourself a little extra time, and that way, like you said, if somebody, heaven forfend, somebody gets sick or whatever, the project is delayed, then there's no penalty if you finish it early.
Yeah, I would say the only drawback with a longer contract, the only thing to be aware of is that you can't have two contracts happening simultaneously. So like if you're in the middle of a contract, but you haven't completed the projects for it, you can't apply for another project because you're still in an unfinished project. So as soon as you do complete the project, if you want to apply for again, make sure that you get it approved by the USDA and paid out, and then you can apply again.
Okay. That is good to know. Thank you for explaining that. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Seven Springs Farm Supply is a farm-based supply company focused on serving market gardeners and has been in business for 35 years. Their catalog includes a comprehensive selection of approved for organic fertilizers, pest and disease controls, growing mixes, cover crop seed, and more. They offer custom fertilizer blending and seasonal cooperative purchasing opportunities, and their experienced team is ready to help guide you to the best solution for your farm's needs. Growing for Market listeners are eligible for an exclusive discount. Visit sevenspringsfarm.com/GFM or give them a call at 540-651-3228. That's sevenspringsfarm.com/GFM for an exclusive discount.
Hey, it's Lindsay from Grown By. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers. And that's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. I'm proud and excited to share 2 new features now available on top of the tools you already know and love. Number 1, our customizable CSA box builder. It allows your customers to simply say what they'd like in their share, and Grown By matches their preferences with your weekly harvest. Number 2, our new wholesale-only marketplace. Developed with the Culinary Institute of America, it makes your life easier with a dedicated shop for your wholesale customers. No more texting those chefs, combining retail and wholesale inventories and records, and, drumroll, automatic payments on due dates. No more chasing down late payments. These new features sit alongside our popular online sales and traditional subscription CSA tools, making it easier than ever to manage your farm's business. As you start to get ready for next season, we'd love to hear from you and see if our cooperative can be a partner in growing your farm. Visit us at grownby.com. That's GROWNBY.com.
And now, back to the show. One follow-up question that I did have for you is, were all of these projects, the ones you described, high tunnel, the ones you described in the article 3 years ago, the high tunnel, the alley cropping, the windbreak, I'm blanking on, there was another element, but...
Wildlife habitat, yeah, or the birdhouses, wildlife structures.
Yes, thank you. Were all 4 of those elements under the same USDA NRCS high tunnel grant? And I don't understand. We've never done the NRCS high tunnel program. So I guess my question is, did they all fall under the high tunnel program? So you were like, oh, we want to build another high tunnel, and while we're at it, we're also going to do the alley cropping, the wildlife habitat, the cover cropping and windbreak and all that kind of other stuff? Or were those separate? Was the high tunnel one request, and then the other, the stuff outside the high tunnel were other requests? Does that make sense? I'm trying to think, like,
I think so.
I'm trying to think through the process, especially since I've never done it. If someone is listening to this and wants to do something similar, does that make sense? Like, is it all under the NRCS, the same grant?
Yeah, it's all under the NRCS EQIP.
Okay,
so
EQIP
is kind of like the subheading that typically is used. A lot of farmers, at least this size style farming, market farming, typically utilize the high tunnel. And that's what EQIP is known for, is the high tunnel. But within EQIP, you have all alley cropping, you have windbreak repair, you have cover crop, you have pollinator habitat. I mean, I think there's a whole long list, maybe 20 or more different practices that all fall under EQIP. And I don't remember what that acronym stands for, but I do think when you're applying, like if your impetus is your high tunnel, apply for all those other things at the same time, because they really, depending upon what it is, it may not require a lot of extra effort. You can put it into your long-term plan for what you're doing on your farm, and it does get you to rank higher. So I wouldn't do them as separate applications. It would all be one application. You're applying for the high tunnel and all these other things, et cetera, at the same time.
Okay, thank you. That is a great tip, because I guess partially not having gone through the process, and even if we had, I don't know if I would have known that. But, I'm very familiar with growers using the NRCS EQIP for high tunnels. But I always thought of it as just like a standalone. It's like, you apply for a high tunnel. I didn't realize you could apply for other stuff under that same grant, because a lot of the other projects you mentioned are very logical projects that farmers might be wanting to be doing on their farms anyway. And so, I mean, if those other projects help them even rank higher and more likely to get their grant, I mean, sounds like a real win-win right there, to just do a little bit of extra, add some other projects you probably want to do anyway and more likely to get funded. Brilliant. Great.
Yeah, certainly like some of the projects you might not be doing anyways, like the bat houses or something, but some you might be, like cover cropping is often happening already on farms. And you don't have to do a long cover crop, like buckwheat applies. So even if you're throwing buckwheat on a bed for 45 days or something like that, that would meet the criteria of the project. You don't get it all paid for, but you get a decent amount of the seed paid for. So why not have someone else pay for it if you can,
Yeah. Why not? Oh, hey, and can you tell us a little bit about what your composting facility is like? That sounds interesting. I just wanted to get you to just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's not built yet because we're just in year one of that contract now. So part of year one was actually cover crop and wildlife structures. So I'm kind of doing that again, because you can always add more bird houses to your farm and do more cover cropping. But the plan has several stages laid out into it. So, the high tunnel, the bird structures, the cover cropping, etc. But then it has, even for the composting facility, it has stages. So the first stage would be pouring a concrete foundation and getting a gravel access road to that concrete foundation, which is going to house it's an in-vessel composting machine. So it's about 20 feet long. It's manufactured in Canada, and it has a motor with paddles inside of it. So if you could imagine this big tube that's 20 feet long and maybe about 3 feet wide, you feed your plant waste into one end and you push either a little switch or a foot pedal, and it turns the vessel, turns all the stuff inside of it. And in a period of about 2 to 3 weeks, depending upon how often you're feeding it, how often you're turning it, you will get compost coming out the other end that is a texture that is like finished compost. It's still a little bit actively decomposing. So our plan has like 3 different finishing bins on the concrete pad that are all measured to like our tractor bucket or our skid bucket. So we can move the compost into these different bins pretty easily. No one's bending over and shoveling or wheelbarrowing. It's all kind of at a scale where we can utilize our equipment in a way that seems helpful. And so then we'll have like a period of time where it's getting completely finished, and then we can use it for things like we plant our tulips. We treat our tulips like annuals, and we build raised beds. So we put all the bulbs on the ground, first we build a little wooden structure, then we put all the tulips on the ground, and I'm talking about 27,000 tulips.
More than just a couple.
Yeah. And then we use the skid and dump compost that is municipal compost that I've been buying for years that is really low quality, but it's the only thing I have access to in my city. It's low quality because it's imported weed seeds, or it's had little bits of plastic, or like those tips to cigars, or like all the kind of crazy weird stuff you find in municipal compost, potentially herbicide residue, all those things. So it's not great quality. It's not fully finished. It has a lot of problems, and it's expensive, and I have to pay someone to bring it to the farm. So there's all these drawbacks to utilizing that, but it makes planting tulips really easy, and it's really good for our tulips. And then we can turn around and plant into that bed, and it's usually a great texture for planting. So what I think could even be better is if we're taking all of our plant waste, as well as some wood chips we get from a local arborist, feed it into this machine, have it processed through fully finishing, and then utilize it kind of in a closed loop system. We could even add nutrients like azomite and gypsum and all those sorts of things to the composting vessel while it's composting, so that we can get really highly high quality, both in texture and in nutrients, material that we can utilize for planting.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Who's the manufacturer on that compost unit, if you don't mind saying?
I don't mind saying, but I don't know if I remember off the top of my head. I have my program notes in here.
Okay.
I can get back to you about that. I can't remember the brand.
Okay, yeah, that'd be
It is based in Canada, and there's been a couple other farms. Actually, Moonshot Farm has one of the same brand of composter. So there's a few places in the country where it's being utilized already.
Oh, cool. Okay, that's not something I'm familiar with. So I was just curious if I'd heard of the manufacturer, and also, maybe help people track it down if that's something they're interested in, because that is not something I'm familiar with, but it sounds cool. And quick question on all those tulips. You set them so that the bottom is down and the top is up before you cover them with compost.
Sort of, yeah.
It doesn't matter too much.
I don't think it matters too much. I think the plant will find which direction is up. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's good to know. That's why I asked. Okay. Because yes, I'm sure that probably not being picky about what direction they're facing is probably speeds up planting 27,000 tulips?
Yeah.
Yeah, that I can imagine that probably speeds it up a lot, not having to worry if they're pointed up or not. So okay, good to know.
Yeah, I will say we do it by hand. We don't use a tractor to do it. And this last year, it did just take us one day, not even a full day, to plant all of them. So it is a pretty quick process.
Wow. Okay. Great. All right, Maggie, I wanted to make sure and ask you about the wildlife structures. Like, what did you put up, and did the right birds find them?
Yeah, so I put up 2 large bat houses. Each bat house could hold like 300 or so bats. So far, we haven't had a lot of bat activity. I actually have a friend who does research on bats at the university. So she loaned me one of her little sonar devices so I could do some recordings and see if we were picking up any bat activity here at the farm. And we haven't had any, but I haven't borrowed that piece of equipment for over a year. So maybe there's some more. And then I put up some bird houses, a screech owl nest, which didn't get screech owl. It just got a lot of sparrows building in it. So I moved it this spring to a different location. So hopefully, maybe there'll be some screech owls that come. And I put up some bluebird houses, and we have had some bluebirds around the farm. So that's good. I did also build a kind of an odd structure. There were plans. I think the Audubon Society has different plans for building your own. So this was a nest for, I'm losing track of the name of the bird right now. It's a larger owl. And that actually, we used chicken wire and landscape fabric, and it kind of just looked like trash that had blown up in the tree. But I was following the plans that were put out by the Audubon Society, and it actually did not necessarily bring a bird to the farm to nest there, but we have had it's a great horned owl. There it is. Okay.
Oh, great horned owl. Okay.
Yeah, so we did build a nest structure for a great horned owl. And although we didn't have an owl build a nest in that structure, I have had several pairs of owls that I've heard here on the farm at different times a year. So they do a really cool sounding call and response. And I've been able to hear it and go outside and put my little bird sound recording identifier app on and confirm that it was a great horned owl. And
oh, cool.
So that's been pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, they're so cool. And I'm not sure if we have great horned here in Maine, but we have a few other owls, and they're so cool to hear at night because they're so loud. Do you know what I like?
So loud.
Yeah, it'll be pretty quiet with night sounds, and then even when they're kind of far away, the owls are surprisingly loud, or at least the ones that we have around here. So that's really cool to hear them at night.
Yeah, I will say, I think I mentioned in the article, but I did take out a lot of farms, at least in the Midwest, have these kind of standard security lights that are put in by the electric company, and they have a photovoltaic thing so that they come on when it gets dark and they turn off when it gets light. They don't really have a switch where you can turn them on and off yourself. They're just kind of wired into the electric here at the farm. And I did remove that when I first moved to the farm. And I think that's been really helpful for migrating birds and just to create a space for, hawks and owls to be in the trees. And hopefully that will eventually help with some of our vole and mice and rat pressure that we have on the farm, as most farms have at some point in time. So, yeah, I do think that there is a lot more wildlife here than there was when I bought the farm in 2019. And one of the things that people most comment on, it's almost like across the board. If a florist comes to pick up flowers, if I'm outside and I'm talking on the phone, or if anyone comes to the farm for a tour or a workshop, they always say, wow, there's so many birds here and there's so many bird sounds. And so I think, creating these structures, creating some habitat for them and having these tall established trees already here, it creates quite an oasis for all sorts of wildlife, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, well, that must be kind of like a sonic validation that things are getting healthier on your farm, right?
I think so.
That's really cool because I know that in a lot of places farms are getting bigger and more consolidated, and part of that is sometimes they, like flatten old fence lines and hedgerows and things like that, which are windbreaks and wildlife habitat. And so that's really cool that you seem to be rewilding your corner of the world. All right. Well, so Maggie, I know you mentioned that you're working on a book. Can you tell us what your book is about?
Well, I loved seeing this in the interview questions. And I know when we met in Albuquerque in January, we were talking about the book. I don't necessarily, I'm writing, but I'm not necessarily writing the book quite yet. Part of being interviewed for this podcast and some of the other podcasts I've been in or articles that I've written is a way for me to practice finding my voice, to see what it is that I have to offer that's unique, that people are also interested in. So I'm still just kind of like my USDA contract has a long time frame on it. I still am giving myself kind of a long time frame for writing this book because I don't want to just quickly put something out there that doesn't either have value to me or value to the readers. So what it's kind of starting to take shape as is a book that really helps farmers and maybe even other small business owners and entrepreneurs with some of the really challenging things that we are faced with, even though they don't initially look like they're what we set out to do, being a farmer, being a small business owner. And that is management or compassionate leadership of a team and people. And that means, like, from the beginning, getting systems in place to make sure that your team knows what's in your brain and what your vision is for, like, efficiency and tasks, but also how do you hire people? How do you create clear expectations, offer people a well-rounded workplace where they're, fairly compensated is one part of it, but there's so many things that are much more kind of practical and human. And then also, like, one of the more challenging things about being a manager, farm owner, business boss, whatever it is realizing when someone's not the right fit for your team and having to end that person's employment. So I would really like to write about some of those things that I have found extremely challenging for myself. I think that for me, learning how to do management well in a way that is compassionate to the people that are really supporting what originally was just my dream, my little project, my vision for my farm, and now has become something that is much more backed by the community. And there's a lot more interdependence. I know florists that we work with that bid weddings basically using our flowers as part of the plan. So now this matters to more people than me. And so because the people that are here on the farm team as a crew are also invested in the positive outcomes and the vision. So I really want to make sure that people that are working here are taken care of and that I'm doing the best that I can as a manager. So that's kind of where the book is taking, where it's leading me at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, That's a great idea, Maggie. Partially because I'm not aware that there's a lot that's been written on that subject. I mean, especially books. I mean, one thing that might be interesting to you in that context is actually Rebecca Kutzer Rice has an article in the forthcoming June, July Growing for Market, which will be out by the time this podcast comes out, talking about some of the sort of like employee benefits and things like that that she's tried on her farm. But overall, management is really tricky, like you said, and it's not. I don't think anybody gets into farming because they want to manage people, or it's a very rare person in any case. But that's the kind of thing, sort of like we were talking about earlier, is that I think even sometimes if people got into farming and didn't necessarily want to have a boss, didn't necessarily want to have employees, they get to some point where either they want to grow the farm or they realize they aren't as young as they used to be, and they need to bring on some more people to just keep the farm going into the future, whatever that vision is. And so it sounds like a very timely subject because so one thing I probably think more about growing for market articles than most people. I feel like the first era of growing for market was really focused on the growing. It was like people just needed to know how to grow the stuff. And then I feel like once we had a lot of articles, like a knowledge base on growing, which we still have a lot of articles on growing, but then I feel like it switched over a little bit to marketing. It was like, okay, so we know how to grow stuff that consumers want to buy directly from farmers. Let's figure out how to sell it. I mean, obviously, it's in the name of the magazine, right? Growing for market. But then I feel like I've been trying, for the last decade that I've had the magazine to pick up on the business of market farming, along with the other stuff, keep the growing, keep the marketing going, but also, realize that nobody gets into farming because they enjoy business, or almost nobody. And so yeah. Things like how to run the financials on your business, how to manage people, how to be a good boss, like these are the things that I think nobody thinks about when they get interested in farming, but once they're 10 years down the road, they realize they want to know this stuff. So
it's
I
so
think
important. I think you're saying it really well. I think that in the early days, you are just learning how to grow things, and then you're learning how to sell them. And if you get good at both of those things, then you're going to need help. And that is a thing that it's often forgotten to talk about, because there is so much there's so many things that are exciting about learning to grow plants, and I will never be bored by that idea and continuing to improve and learn that. And selling also has a certain sexiness to it, in that you're making money off these things that you learned how to grow. And then it gets a little bit more challenging in a different way that maybe at initial look doesn't sound either fun and exciting or sexy, because it's really hard stuff and it's very personal and it's about people, and there can be a lot of things that are tangly about working with people. So I think there is kind of a lack in resources, not just in the farming world, but, in other small businesses. There's a lot for corporate managers or, those sorts of things, but there isn't a lot for the artisanal candle maker that now opened a shop that has a whole bunch of online wholesale business and needs a crew to produce those candles, or, the farmer that all of a sudden is producing and selling in several different revenue streams and now needs a team, and maybe even within that team needs different layers of management. So yeah, it's tricky, and there's a lack of resources, and I think I'm very passionate about it. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great idea, and I think it's also something that a lot of other people strive to do, as far as, be a good boss, be a good employer, because I think a lot of people who are running farms have been farm workers themselves, and also almost goes along with the triple bottom line, like wanting to make money, but while also doing right by the environment and the people and all those kinds of things. So I think it's a very timely subject and something that would appeal to a lot of our audience. So
yeah, I think about my farm sustainability as the 3 Ps, and I don't think I made that up. Maybe you're familiar with it, but the planet, the profit, and the people, and all 3 of those Ps have to be working in order for the farm to sustain itself. And, I think some of those aspects of it profit is a whole nother thing that I'm sure we could talk about for a long time, but it has some taboo around it sometimes for certain farmers, because that's not necessarily the motivation initially for a lot of people. They might leave more higher paying jobs to become farmers. So it's not a money driven motivation to become a farmer. But if your farm doesn't make money, you can't do the good work that you're intending to do. So it's essential. And not every farmer has the planet in mind. So that's not everybody's top three things for sustainability. And maybe even for some people or some farmers, that third P of people is less important initially, but starts to become more and more important, especially if you are making a profit and your farm is growing. So I think all three components are really important. Taking care of the planet, taking care of the profit, and taking care of the people in your business is going to make it sustainable for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you put it really well. And I do want to encourage farmers to talk about all three of the P's, because you're right. There's a certain, hesitancy or taboo to talk about profit. And I think you're right, because so many people who go into farming have other motivations than just making money. I almost feel like people worry that they're going to come off as, that's their main thing, profit, if they talk about profit. But I also want people's businesses to survive from year to year. So sometimes I'm like, you know what? If you need to think about profit as the modern equivalent of making a surplus so that you make it through to the next year, like, think of it that way. But I really want, sort of like what I was saying, along with, trying to make sure and focus on the business aspect of farming, in this fourth decade of growing for market. I think profit has to come into the equation, even if it's not your primary function. And the thing is, it doesn't matter how much you love it, if you're not making a profit and just grinding yourself every year, it's really easy to burn out. And that's not what we want. We want people to make a decent living market farming, so they keep doing it. And so that sounds like your book would contribute to that. So all right, Maggie, we'll do another interview in 3 years when you have a chance to cut your perennials, and then in 4 years or 5 years, or whenever your book is ready, let's do another one and talk about your book.
That sounds good.
And also, in the meantime, I don't know, you think about, keep us in mind. I really like the article that you wrote for us a few years ago, Maggie, because if you are pitching a book, a lot of times they ask you to write a chapter to present along with a pitch or something like that. And so, maybe you could write an article for Growing for Market about part of the first chapter, or one aspect that you would be writing about the book, and you could come out and Growing for Market, and then you could use it for your book pitch. So just a little idea for you.
All right, I'm going to take that prompt. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, Maggie, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and, a chance to catch up with you a little more than when I saw you back in January at the ASCFG. But I did want to make sure, is there anything else I should have asked you, or anything you'd like to say before we let you go?
No, I guess I was just thinking just now, like, if listeners have kind of management or boss or ownership issues that they are curious about, or they are finding a lack of resources in, if you want to send me a message, either an email or a direct message through Instagram or something like that, I'd love to kind of know what you're missing or what you want to learn more about, and see if it's something that I do have knowledge and a voice to share something about. That'd be great to know what people need.
That's a great idea. Great idea to get ideas from the audience.
Yeah. And I would also say it's just been really nice to have this conversation with you, and just want to reiterate how grateful I am for the articles that have been published in Growing for Market, and all the knowledgeable farmers and voices that have contributed to the podcast so far. And thank you for your work, Andrew. And I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Maggie. Yeah, I mean, likewise. I'm grateful to all the market farmers who have been writing for the magazine for 35 years now, and been coming on the podcast, and are so generous in sharing with all the things that they've learned by hard work, including yourself on both of those points, as far as, you've written for the magazine, and now you've been on the podcast. So thank you, because I know this is a busy time of the year, right? We're end of May. It must be a very busy time. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us about all this stuff. And so Actually, so following up on your request for comments from people, so where can people find you online or on social media or wherever you want them to look you up and send you their farm management questions?
Yeah, so our website is pretty straightforward. It's Delight Flower Farm. And that's also our Instagram handle and our Facebook handle. And our email address is delightflowerfarm@gmail.com. So any of those avenues of connection are great. I'm pretty active on the Instagram, sharing insights from the farm. And I do often kind of talk people through a walking tour of the farm, a few times, maybe once or twice a month. So you can see what's growing on our farm, not just like what we're harvesting and selling, but also how the perennials are looking, what's happening in the different areas. I kind of tend to use that platform as an educational opportunity for other farmers, for people in my community, also just home gardeners and people that are curious about growing plants and the ways in which we do things. We make a lot of mistakes or we learn a lot of lessons, and I'm happy to be transparent and share some of those lessons that we're learning along the way. So I do actually like sharing a lot of information on Instagram, but we have a pretty robust website as well and can get back to you in a timely manner with email, I think.
Cool. Okay, great. Well, yeah, folks, check it out there. And yeah, once again, Maggie, I really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed catching up on what's gone on since you wrote that article for us about 3 years ago. And I really do appreciate you taking the time and look forward to checking in again at some point in the future.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. Thanks, Maggie. Take care. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.